You're listening to EdTech Heroes, a podcast that looks at how teachers in today's classrooms can use technology to improve student learning. In each episode, a hero in the world of education will share their story and discuss how innovation can influence the minds of the next generation. Let's jump in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to EdTech Heroes. I'm Nef, and today's guest is Natalie Conway. Natalie is an online special education teacher, a mentor teacher, an instructional coach for SYS Education, and a podcast host. She has been teaching for 16 years, working both in public schools and online charters. Natalie hosts SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education, a podcast all about online education. Natalie, welcome so much to EdTech Heroes.
Thank you, Nef. I am really excited to be here and so appreciative of the time to speak with you again.
Absolutely. We got the opportunity to talk a little bit when I was on your show. So now we're flipping seats,
I
which is
love
pretty
it.
cool.
Yes, it's my favorite.
So I know that you began your teaching career not too long ago, back in 2005, and
Mhm.
then you pivoted to online education in 2014,
I
which
did.
can you believe that has been 8 years?
No, not at all. It's really impossible. Recently, someone asked me, "How long were you in brick and mortar versus how long have you been online?" And I had to actually do the math, and it shocked me that I had hit, like, the 50-50 mark. Like, I've been online as long as I had been in brick and mortar settings, and that was just blew my mind. That's getting older, I guess.
Yeah. Jeez. So I am so fascinated by that because I feel like we've had lots of conversation around online education being a viable solution
Mm.
lately. But you were there before online education was this big fad and it was a trend. So, what was it like to be an online educator way back in 2014?
It was a little bit different, and it is, interesting to see the changes over time and then to see everyone kinda coming on board willingly or not, recently, but really the things in 2014 that were harder for me that aren't as hard now, a lot of that has to do with the technology improving
Hmm.
over those years. So, when you first transition from especially if you were a brick and mortar teacher first and then you move to being an online educator, you want to just use all those paper-based resources that you've had over the
Hmm.
years, and you can't, and you need to figure out how to either digitize those or how to just totally scrap them and reinvent them. So that transition from worksheets to PowerPoint or Google Slides, that was really hard for me at first, and I think that was one of the biggest things. And also, learning management systems have really improved over the
Hmm.
years, and they've become much more robust, and they've also started to cater more towards elementary aged students. So initially, most learning management systems, like if you think of Blackboard or Canvas or any of the other ones, they're really meant for colleges, or they were built for
Hmm.
universities and college level instruction initially. And so when online schools and charters started using those platforms for K-12, there weren't that many of us. And
Mm.
now, 2014 to 2022, there are way more, and organizations like Canvas have even started to use marketing specifically for elementary. So they've taken those
Hmm.
concerns like, okay, this works for high school really well and okay for middle school, but how do we make this look like elementary school online? And they're starting to come up with new products and services for that. So it's been neat to see the evolution over time. We didn't have Zoom before. I think I started using Zoom maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and they were this teeny tiny company, and now, of course, everyone's had Thanksgiving dinner over Zoom. So, we've come a long way. There's a lot of improvements that have happened, and I am excited for the continuing improvements of all these apps and platforms.
Yeah, that is such cool perspective in terms of how the evolution of technology has just made online education a lot easier. And it sounds like perhaps a bit more fruitful for students, where all of the communication might have been asynchronous back in 2014. Now they get to hop on a Zoom call and interact with other online students in this really robust platform. That is really, really cool.
Yeah.
So, I imagine that even though technology has improved so much, that there are still challenges that exist within online education. So, can you talk about what challenges you face as an online educator now in 2022?
Oh, yeah. There are still plenty of them. Just as there are in a brick and mortar setting in
Mhm.
any school, there are absolutely challenges, and there definitely are unique ones to the online setting. First, like what I alluded to before, trying to get your paper and pencil activities
Mhm.
to go digital, that's hard. That's a challenge for sure, and really figuring out curating your materials and determining what you're going to use and what isn't going to be used that year or that week. That kind of goes into another challenge, which is paring down your activities and paring down your instruction. You have limited time when you're an online educator with your students. They're not in front of you for 6 or 8 hours, 5 days a week. So you have maybe an hour a day, maybe 3 hours a day of live instruction on whatever your video conferencing tool is, and
Mhm.
you need to make the most of that, and that has to be really robust and really interactive, and so that's a challenge too because that's a complete mind shift, and then their asynchronous activities, you can't be expecting a student to be in a seat at a computer for 4 hours, 6 hours, working on just your class. So, paring down your instruction and really figuring out what is the meat and potatoes of a
Mhm.
lesson or of a unit, that can be really hard at first when you're first transitioning. And then I think the third one that I still face today is connecting with families, connecting with students. It's something you have to be very intentional about in the online setting. You don't get the physical cues that you do when you're in
Right.
person with students. So you really need to work hard to get to know the kids, to get to know their families without feeling like you're intruding on their lives or crossing any lines. But that homeschool connection just becomes so much stronger and so much more necessary because you do
Mhm.
have fewer touch points. So that can be a challenge too. And that's also really a blessing because I've gotten to know my students in a deeper way on certain levels than I would if we were in a brick and mortar because I am reaching out so often, because I am in touch with their parents so frequently that you just become a part of their lives, whether they like it or not. So hopefully they like it. But yeah, that's a challenge that also can be a benefit, I think.
Yeah, certainly. Let's take one step back, and I want you to walk us through what a typical day for you is like as an online educator. Tell us the nitty gritty. I want to feel like I am there in Miss Conway's classroom.
Oh man. So I've had the pleasure of being a special education teacher online and
Mm-hmm.
also a fifth grade teacher online. So those two roles look a little bit different, but most of my experience has been in special ed. So I'll let you know what a day in the life of Mrs. Conway in special ed looked like. Basically, you are on call from 8 to 5. So you have kind of that 9 to 5 work day
Mm-hmm.
feel to your week, and we do those extended hours so that parents and families can get in touch with you for a larger portion of the day because we know they're working or they're supporting their student at home as well. So a typical day for me, I would be waking up, getting my breakfast, maybe doing a little yoga in the morning if I'm really good that day, and then opening up the laptop, answering emails from the night before or really early that
Mm-hmm.
morning. I tend to flex my hours. I like to do some early morning work. So I am that person who's emailing you at 6 a.m. Or if I'm really conscious about it, I'm hitting schedule send on the email and I'm emailing you at 6, but you're going to get it at 8. So I'm taking care of all of that. I like those quiet hours in the morning before everyone else is up and doing things and everyone else is working and emailing you because in special ed, you get emailed and contacted a lot all day. So a lot of my day is fielding emails, is drafting IEPs, getting in touch with what we call related service providers. So like speech and language pathologists,
Mhm.
occupational therapists. If I have high school kids on my caseload, then I am pinging all of their teachers, getting info to update their IEP, or I'm checking the student information system to look at grades and progress reports. So you're doing a lot of paperwork and a lot of communicating. So whether that be an
Mhm.
email or phone. And then I am touching base with parents. So every teacher has a different system for this, but you look at your caseload or you look at your class list and you say, okay, I'm going to call these 5 kids this week or today. And I'm going to call the next 5 next time. And so always trying to be in touch with families. So spend maybe an hour or so doing that, getting in touch with families. And then the best part of my day is co-teaching. And that will happen depending on the day, different times. So our younger kids have classes really early in the morning. We might have like an 8 or an 8:30 to kick off the day doing reading. So I'm popping into a class and the general ed teacher and I are co-teaching, or maybe I'm taking a group in Zoom and we're doing our own thing in a
Mhm.
breakout. And then same thing for the afternoons. So pretty similar. Usually working with my older students in the afternoons. We do math classes on average about 3 days a week live. So you might have Algebra 1, say
Mhm.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or something like that. So it's a lot of collaborative time and then co-planning as well. So when we're not teaching live together, we're co-planning, and that happens both asynchronously and then also synchronously. So we have our live times that we actually all get on Zoom and talk about our plans, and then we keep a running Google Doc as well where we just, or Sheets depending on the teacher, and we have our
Mhm.
plans going there, so constantly talking and figuring out what we're going to do next week or how we're going to help that student who needs an extra boost or challenge that kiddo who has done all the work already and it's Tuesday. So, yeah, day in the life of a special ed teacher is really a lot of communication and
Mhm.
collaboration and paperwork, of course, but that's not the exciting part.
I think special education teachers who are listening are going to feel really connected to communication, collaboration, and listening. I think the part that is a little bit different from what you're describing from this online education space in the brick and mortar space is switching context between elementary students and high school students all in the same day.
Yeah.
Most brick and mortar teachers who are watching probably either work in a high school or they work in an elementary school. They're not asked to do both. So, what is that like in terms of going between these two different contexts?
It's a trip. It's really fun. When I when I was an elementary brick and mortar special ed teacher, there was one year where I had kindergarten in 5th grade, and that was 2 completely different worlds, and I would think that was just the wildest. And then when I worked for Frontier Charter Academy, I was co-teaching, or I was teaching and running special ed for 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. And so I was in middle
Mm,
school and then I'm in high school as well. And so it depends on the size of your school, the number of staff you have, and then the number of students you have. So
hmm,
I was very fortunate to work with a really lovely team at FCA. And so we would try to be equitable with each other about caseloads. And, if it just worked out that, yeah, I was going to be K1 and 910, like that's what it is. And that's fine. So it is such a trip, and it's actually a really great kind of mental workout. You can
hmm,
kinda get comfortable with where you are and what you're doing, and it becomes a little bit rote maybe, and so to have to totally switch it up and just how you act and your demeanor, like my 1st grade Zoom self is a lot different than my junior in high school Zoom self, and so it's such a challenge, it really is. I think for me personally, high school math was the hardest. As a high school student, I had done fine in math and obviously went to college and took math there, and I've done math through calculus, but then you don't do that for a decade and you're asked to go back to it. It's humbling. So it's a really good exercise in asking for help when you need it and relying on your peers as well. I think one of the most fun and challenging things about that transition from, or the combination of teaching
hmm.
elementary and secondary, is math. That is one of the hardest things because, we all can do elementary math. We all can. Even if you're scared of Common Core, you can do elementary math. But then when you come to Algebra 1 or geometry or Algebra 2, there are things that you just have not done in a
Hmm.
decade or longer, right? And so it's a very humbling experience. There's a bit more research that I had to do, or just asking my teaching peer, hey, all right, show me CliffsNotes version. What do we need to do? Okay. And that was a really great exercise for them as well, I think, because to teach it to a teacher or to have me ask all these questions prior is just priming them for working with our
Mm.
variety of students who are going to be in the class the next day or the next week too. So that's definitely the hardest. I mean, my first grade Zoom self is just a totally different personality in a lot of ways than my high school Zoom self and all of that. But I just think it's good mental gymnastics.
It certainly is. And it sounds like you're describing constantly being on your toes and also being in this space where you are thinking constantly about your practice as a teacher, which I can
Mhm.
imagine only makes you better.
I hope so. Yeah, it is a lot. It's that feeling of being on. We all kind of feel that
Hmm.
when we're in a Zoom call, right? Like you feel on. And that is very real no matter how many years you're an online educator. You just feel like that time that you're live with kids, you want to be 110% for that because you're only getting 3 hours a week, maybe, or five
Hmm.
hours a week, and you just want it to be good. So, yeah, it does. You hone your skills.
Certainly. I want to step back yet again and maybe take a 30,000-foot view of online education. I think as a society, we have had a conversation lately about what students really benefit from online education and what students may not. And I think as part of that conversation, folks have made some generalizations around special education students perhaps not being the population that benefit the most from online education. So, while I have you here on the show, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Is there any truth to this idea that some students just don't benefit from online education? And if that is true, is that population specific?
Those are great questions, and those are really honest questions, so I always appreciate that. I think what we've realized over time is that there is no one size fits all. There is no
Hmm.
one model that works for all kids, and there's nothing sacred about the brick and mortar classroom, and there's nothing sacred about the online classroom. They are just different classrooms that exist to serve students in the public, right? So you can homeschool, you can private school, you can charter school. There's just all these options. And online schooling absolutely can work for kids with special needs. I've seen it myself personally. I know it is true. I also know that it's not a good fit for everybody.
Hmm.
So there are absolutely students who benefit from simply being out of the physical environment that is a school. They just benefit from not having those distractions, be they social, emotional, relating with other kids, bullying, all kinds of issues that come up for certain populations of students that just kind of go away when they're online. They're in what we hope is a safe space at home. They're with
Hmm.
teachers who are able to really flex their instruction and their approach and provide accommodations just seamlessly. And it's no big deal. It's no deal. And so for those kids, it works really well. Sometimes they just need us temporarily, and other times they're like, this is my jam and I'm going to excel here. And they do. And that's fantastic. There are other students who absolutely need in person instruction. They need a
Hmm.
physical human to be there doing it with them or working through certain things. And that's okay too. Online will not be the best choice for them. And so it's really up to the parents, it's up to the student to figure out what the good fit is. But the thing online schools do really well are those seamless modifications and accommodations, speech to text to speech, being
Mm.
able to type instead of handwrite, all of these things that can be really hard in a brick and mortar to just insert into a typical classroom are just there for all kids in many online programs already. So you don't need that scribe. You have speech to text right there, or slowing down a recording, being able to read something at your own pace. We have access to things like Newsela, where you can assign to students the same topic, the same article, but it's at 3 different Lexile levels.
Mm-hmm.
And kids don't need to know what Lexile level the other student is reading, but they're getting the same information. So there's a lot that can be done there. And I think there's a huge benefit, and you just need to understand your child's needs, what they need to get out of their schooling, and what kind of accommodations and modifications they require, and if the online platform is gonna be able to do that for them, do that well, and if the school and the program, every school is different. Every online program is run very differently. So understanding, how much responsibility is on the online teacher, how much
Mm-hmm.
responsibility is on the parent, those kinds of things. Really good to know that as well. But I think online education is a huge gift for kids, whether they have IEPs or not. And so I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater just because for certain kids it might not be the best fit, because it's like we don't throw brick and mortar education out the window either for that reason. So it's just a really, really great choice if it's going to meet your needs. And so I just encourage parents and families to do that research if they're interested in pursuing fully online education for their students, just to know what that program is really going to look like day to day, week to week, and if it's going to do what their child needs.
Certainly. And I think a lot of the benefits that you espoused with online education can be tied back to universal design for learning, which is something that you and I got an opportunity to talk about when I was on your show. So I
Yes.
want to pause there for a second because I know that you are an aficionado and absolutely try your best to implement those principles every day. For the uninitiated, can you give us the quick 30-second version of what UDL is?
Sure. My good friend and coworker, Tim Baddock, is the one who first turned me on to UDL, and we spoke about it in depth. And the easiest way to describe it is like when you think of a crosswalk or a curb that ends,
Mhm,
and instead of just being that 90-degree angle, it is ramp of some kind, or maybe
mhm.
it's a ramp with those bumps on it. That's universally designed. So it is allowing everyone and anyone access to the thing they need. So we all need to cross the street, right? So if everyone's going to do that easily, safely, and in an accessible way, ramp does that. And so when we think of instruction and we think of universally designed instruction, that is saying, okay, if I want kids to write this 5-paragraph essay, say, that is my firm goal, but
Mhm.
what are the multiple means that kids can use to get there? And am I going to provide all of those? And if so, how? And all of that. So it's really making it so that whatever you're giving out to kids, every single one of them can access, or they have a choice that they can make that allows them to access it in their own preferred style or manner.
Yeah,
And that's
I
UDL.
love that ramp analogy. It is so, so good for
I'm such a
making
concrete person, so literally and figuratively.
I was just about to say that. Like ramps are often made out of concrete. But I think a lot of times when we have discussions around UDL, they also include technology because technology becomes
Mhm.
some of the ways or one of the ways that we allow kids to access that ramp. So, if
Yes.
we're talking to listeners who might be in a brick and mortar classroom but want to implement some of these ideas of UDL and modifications and accommodations that are happening seamlessly in the online education world, how do they do it? Like, how do they kind of use those best practices that you've learned in online education, but then apply them to brick and mortar classrooms?
Absolutely. It's very doable. It does require a lot of pre-work and really thoughtful intention. So,
Mm,
one of the biggest pieces of advice I have is to really look at your standards. What is it that you're assessing? So, even if you have this activity or this thing you want students to do, whatever it might be, what is actually the standard that is measuring for you? What information are you getting from that? And from there, you can backwards plan. I'm a big fan of backwards design and backwards planning. So it's starting with the end in mind. Like, I need students to show me that they can do two digit by two digit multiplication. So
Mhm.
I have this project in mind, which I think is really cool, but that actually might not be accessible to everyone. So if I backward design that, I'm going to see the holes and I'm going to be able to fill those in. So maybe you need manipulatives that you didn't anticipate needing so that kids can show their learning that way. Maybe you're going to use something like Sketchtoy or whiteboard.fi as these digital whiteboards that kids can be working on that you can see in real time what they're doing, and it's adding a little bit of fun novelty to the approach. If you can provide choice for students, that is always the biggest thing. And so, just like we said at the start of the episode, collaboration and communication. If you can get with your special education teacher who works with your grade level, or your reading specialist, your
Mhm.
instructional coach, whoever it might be, even your teacher peer, the other person who's teaching second grade, whatever it might be, brainstorm for a bit. Okay, this is what I want kids to learn and know how to do. This is the product that I've come up with. What do you think? What am I missing? What about the kids
Hmm.
who struggle with reading? Or what are they going to what's going to be hard for them in this? Okay, what about my kids who are English language learners? What which sort of things should I put in place for them? What about my kids who are working way above grade level? My kids who don't know this skill yet? All of those things. So you just start to think of, we would call them like user stories in the online
Hmm.
world, but it's the same thing in a brick and mortar. So just you have to look at your students as a whole. Who do you have in front of you? What needs do they have that you can anticipate? And then, like, what buffet of choices? Katie Novak says, offer a buffet of choices. And it's a really nice way to think about it, because you're getting everyone again to that same end product, to that same goal, but you're allowing them to take different routes. And so that might
Mhm.
look like a kid talking to you and just verbalizing to you what the process is and how to do it. It might be them narrating a Khan Academy video of how to
Hmm.
do it, or making their own, or drawing pictures to show it, whatever that might be. As long as you're allowing those flexible means, you're going to allow each kid to get to that goal.
Certainly. As you were talking, Natalie, I was like, okay, I need an analogy here because you came up with such a great one. And I feel like what we are doing is we're hosting a dinner party, and we've got a vegan who's going to be there. We've got somebody who's gluten free. We've got a staunch meat eater. And we're like, how are we going to be able to accommodate all of these folks toward the goal of getting them full and happy when they leave my house? And then we create this buffet that is going to speak to all of these different dietary choices, and everybody gets to be a part of it. Everybody gets to meet that standard or meet that goal together at the same table, but might be enjoying the meal slightly differently than the person that's sitting next to them, which is an interesting concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not that you need to design your lesson or design your unit five different ways. That's really not what it
Mhm.
is. It's designing paths and choices. So,
Mhm.
the person who's the vegan at your meal is totally going to dive into your vegan meal, but your meat eater might take a scoop of that too. And that's
Mhm.
okay
Mhm.
because it's delicious. So, yeah, it's thinking of it in those terms, that everyone's free to make that choice. And of course, kids are going to make some great choices for themselves and maybe some not as great, successful choices. But that in and of itself is a learning experience. And if we
Mhm.
can walk them through that, that's really valuable for their self efficacy and their growth. And then they know next time. And we're assuming you're going to give them a next time. So it's all good. It's all learning.
Absolutely. And the learning that occurs when students may have picked the quote unquote wrong choice is also really important because it becomes that learning that exists at the metacognitive level that is
Mhm.
so important in helping students understand how they learn best, you know?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. There's no drawback to
Mhm.
that. And we oftentimes in brick and mortar and online, we're so driven by time. We feel like we need to cover all of this material, all of these standards, and like we need to keep moving forward, moving forward. And sometimes we lose sight of the process of learning and that love of inquiry and exploration and curiosity. And so if we allow ourselves to kind of slow down and accept that we will have bumps and this might take an extra week, or we will have to go back and give that student a second chance. They're going to have to go back to the buffet and pick another another dish because that first one did not work. That's okay. That's all right. And we will keep moving forward, but they are learning, and all of that learning is valuable. I think that's something the pandemic did teach us, is that there is so much more learning that happens in a school and in life than you get from a book, or you get from a
Hmm.
lecture, or you get from, a specific standard in the curriculum. There's just so many other life skills that are taught and that we need to be spending time on. So it's okay.
For sure, for sure. I do love that as a lesson from the last couple of years. I know you mentioned that during your time in education, you've also served as an instructional coach in addition to being a rock star classroom practitioner. Can you talk a little bit about what your approach is to instructional coaching?
Yeah, I love instructional coaching. So everyone has their story of, why they left the classroom and what they're doing now and why. And being in special ed allowed me the opportunity to work with such a variety of educators from kindergarten through high school, and to see what they do and to see how they do it and to get better myself because I'm learning from dozens of teachers every year. So that's a real gift to special educators, is that we
Hmm.
get to collaborate at that level. So I've always wanted to work with educators. I really liked offering professional development for our team of teachers and learning new things. I'm a constant just nerd, and I can't stop going to school for some reason. So I'm always learning new things and wanting to share those with the people I'm around. And so instructional coaching was just a really natural next step for me. And I'm so thankful to be in this position and so happy to be in this position. But what I do now is basically based on the work of Brené Brown and Elena Aguilar. So Elena Aguilar has written books and has a podcast and all kinds of things about instructional coaching. And then Brené Brown, leadership and vulnerability and all of that. So I kind of take those two really fantastic women and I mesh their styles with my own. And that's how I approach instructional coaching. I let the educator take the wheel. They are in charge. They are steering the ship, whatever analogy you want to use. They're there. I am on their side. I am their cheer squad. I am their supporter. I am their runner, but they're in charge of what it is they want to learn or do
Hmm.
better or explore. And if they're stuck in that area, then I'm there to help kind of unearth maybe something they didn't realize before that they do want to learn more about or explore
Hmm.
in terms of their own pedagogy. So it's a really neat mentoring relationship that is, for me, always striving to be peer to peer. I don't know some magical key that you don't, or I don't have like some secret potion that's just going to work and I impart it to you. Kind of like teaching, I don't want to be the sage on the stage because I'm not. I want to be the guide by your side. And so we're walking together to fulfill whatever goal it is that you have for yourself. And those can be short term or long term goals. And it's really fun. I really like this work a lot.
Certainly. I love that. And I will not attempt to create an analogy here, even though every part of me really wants to. But I do think that that idea of instructional coaching really being a partnership that is directed by the teacher rather than the coach is a theme that we've heard a lot since we started this podcast. And I think
Mhm.
for some educators, that can be both liberating and terrifying,
Absolutely.
because the question becomes, how do I guide this relationship? How do I get the most out of this resource in order to grow my practice as an educator? And I'm curious what ideas you might have for teachers who are working with instructional coaches and thinking about how they are going to interact with that individual in order to grow their practice.
Absolutely. If you are lucky enough to have an instructional coach in your life,
Mm-hmm.
that is awesome. Or if you are brave enough and vulnerable enough to say yes to instructional coaching, to volunteer for that, awesome. You are already winning. You're already winning. So, like, kudos to you. Just take a deep breath and know that you're crushing it. That said, if you're wondering, like, what am I going to talk about with this person or how do I even approach this? I am a big fan of writing, journaling, just
Hmm.
letting it out. And sometimes, if you could just take a quiet few minutes and just write about your teaching, just
Hmm.
write down what it is you like, what you want to get better at, what makes you feel insecure, any of those things. If you just kind of let that come out, stream of consciousness, you're going to find some things there that maybe you weren't comfortable even saying out loud to yourself or
Hmm.
really didn't want to think about. But after page 3, you're like, you know what? This is what it is. That's okay. Um, that really helps that self-reflection for me, and I think it's helped others as well. So whatever works for you, but some kind of self-reflection on like, what am I doing well? What am I crushing? And I don't really want to spend too much time on that. And where are my weak points? Where do I
Hmm.
feel insecure? Where do I feel like I don't know what I should know or that other people are doing this thing and I'm not, whatever it might be. And your instructional coach can help you kind of unearth those uncomfortable feelings, work through them and become the better teacher you want to be, whether it's, social emotional learning. You're like, I don't know, I've got second step
Hmm.
material, but I'm not sure if there's something else I could be doing. Or I've done anti-bias training and all of this other stuff, and I'm trying to make sure I'm not centering a white story in my class all the time. Like, how do I help me with that? Anything you might be uncomfortable with or feel really vulnerable or insecure about, like, go for it. Just go for the jugular and tackle that because your instructional coach is there not as a judge, not as an evaluator. They're there to just lift you up. And so take those pieces of your teaching that deep down that like, I need to get better at this. It could even be knowledge based. For me, when I had to hop into high school algebra 2 and geometry, I was like, "Oh, hello. Like I haven't done beyond the Pythagorean theorem in decades. Now I need some help. I need a coach." And so that's the thing I worked on. So there's always something that all of us can get better at, can improve on, or can just hone, right? So a skill that we think we've got, but we want to learn more about. I think that self-reflection piece is really important and just being honest with yourself. It's okay to not know. And your
Hmm.
desire to want to learn and your desire to want to improve for the benefit of your students is just awesome. So just go with that. It will be okay.
For sure. I remember during my first year as a teacher, I was asked to film myself while I was teaching and then go through a self reflection exercise.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Natalie, it was painstaking
Those are the
to sit
worst.
there and watch the things that I did well, the things that I didn't do so well.
Mhm.
And by no means am I encouraging our listeners to do exactly the same thing. But I think in whatever method you engage in self reflection, it becomes such a powerful tool in terms
It
of
does.
working with an instructional coach, but also similar to the conversation that we had earlier of just having that in the back of your mind and being on, right? Like knowing that you want to engage in more culturally responsive teaching, having that in the
Yep.
back of your mind means that the next time that you might commit a faux pas, you're like, wait, wait, wait. I know that this is something that I internally want to work on, which is just as important as being able to pull
Yes.
folks into your circle as a teacher.
Yes, absolutely. And videotaping yourself is the most painful and really effective way to see exactly how it is you're presenting yourself to your kids because there's nothing to hide. You can't hide behind anything there. So I know. I mean, I'm a podcast host and I still don't like listening to my voice sometimes. So I get it. I get it. Self-reflection is hard and that self-analysis is hard, but I think you're spot on. The fact that you get to see it or hear it or you've thought about it
Hmm.
before, you've reflected on it, it's going to help those minute changes that will become bigger over time. So it's absolutely worth the
Exactly.
energy and that uncomfortableness. You got to get comfortable with uncomfortable for sure.
For sure. And I also like that you pointed it out as minute changes. A lot of times it can feel really daunting to say that you're going to go from 0 to 100 overnight,
Mhm.
right? And if we think about this example of just becoming a better geographer, right? Like you're like, okay, maybe I want to learn a little bit more about geography, or in your case, you want to learn a little bit more about geometry. You're like, okay, I start with this one concept and I get a little bit better about with that one, and then I move on from there, and so on and so forth, versus I went to bed and I don't know anything about geography, and then tomorrow I'm going to know the entire globe. It just doesn't work like that.
Right. It doesn't. It doesn't. Small bites. And that, for me personally, and I'm sure for some other personalities out there, it's hard. You want to learn it and do it and be right and go on, but
Mhm.
that's not life. That's not how we attain greatness, really. So it's incremental. It's really little. And we have to celebrate those really little
Mhm.
improvements too. And I think the more self-reflection you do as an educator, the more you see the positive changes that are taking place, and it becomes sustainable. It's really hard. It's like, if you're trying to lose weight or something and you just lose a half a pound or whatever over the course of a week or two, and you're like, that wasn't, I don't want to keep doing this. It can be hard. So give
Mhm.
yourself a little reward, give yourself a pat on the back, or find an accountability partner in your school,
Mhm.
someone who's willing to go on that journey with you, whether it's your instructional coach or someone else. You can be like, "Hey, yeah, no, I saw your recording, or I popped into your class the other day and I saw you do X and that was great."
Mhm.
So that little whatever you need for a little motivation is always good.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I know we've been talking for a while, but before we wrap up our discussion, I do have a really important question to
Mhm.
ask. We have a segment here where we ask every single one of our heroes to share some tips for teachers. And Natalie, I think you are uniquely positioned to tell our listeners a little bit more about implementing technology in their classrooms. If
Mhm.
folks are looking to implement technology specifically for the purpose of adopting more UDL principles, where should they start?
Oh boy. If you are looking to learn more about UDL at all, go to the CAST website. That's going to be a great first resource for you. But in terms of actual technology, things that I've used that I love, that I send people to, first off, Screencastify, 100%. Um, some kind of video application that allows you to quiz kids or interact with kids during
Mm,
it and break it up, good to go. That's going to be really, really helpful, especially if you're trying to flip your classroom. Those are really, really great tools. So definitely something like that. The other things I go to are something like Sketchtoy or whiteboard.fi, which I mentioned earlier. So those are digital whiteboards and they allow you to see kids work in real time. It allows
mhm,
kids to be maybe using a stylus or using their trackpad, whatever they need, and Desmos as well. So speaking of math, as we have, those are
mhm,
really great apps for seeing kids thinking and giving them multiple ways of showing their thinking as well. So, really awesome online tools that you can use. And for your instruction, things like Pear Deck and Nearpod or whatever other program is out there that allows you to make your slides interactive, those are gonna be really huge to keep all kinds of learners engaged and to make your instruction a bit more accessible. So kids can use speech to
mhm,
text or text to speech during that. They can, again, show you in real time what it is they're learning. Um, a lot of apps are embedded now. If you're a Google for Ed school, you've got speech to text and text to speech right there in Google Docs and all of that. So it's perfectly easy to use. And then if you're not using Newsela or you're using something similar, there's all kinds of those applications now that allow you to read a similar or the same story at different lexile levels, which again makes it accessible to
mhm.
other reading levels. So I think if you can find a tool that does what it is you need it to do and only use a couple of them, I know I just mentioned a whole bunch of them, but pick two that you're going to really dedicate some time to and kids and families time to, and they're gonna really do a lot of wonders for you. That's my short
Natalie,
long
did you
list.
just give us a buffet of choices that we
I
can
may
pick from?
have. I totally did.
Oh, look at
Full
that in
circle.
practice.
Full
All right,
circle.
y'all. Natalie, I so appreciate you joining EdTech Heroes. And listeners, be sure to follow Natalie on Twitter. She is at AOE Natalie. And you can subscribe to her podcast, the Adventures in Online Education podcast, wherever you're listening to this one. I'm your host, Nef Dukes, and I am looking forward to seeing y'all next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of EdTech Heroes, presented by Screencastify.